Well, welcome. We're going to get an update for what's happening in Boston from one of our favorite sons of Milford. But for, if there's 7 people watching tonight instead of the faithful 6, let's start with an introduction.
Well, one of them won't be my wife.
Neither is mine, so.
Good evening. John Fernandes, State Representative, towns of Milford, Mendon, Hopedale, and Medway.
So, John, it's a whole series of things all coming together.
It's a new year.
Budgets, and it's January, everything's coming together. What's the biggest item on your list right now?
Boy, I don't know if there's one biggest. It's a multitask responsibility. Chairing the Judiciary Committee has its own set of responsibilities that I can't escape no matter my own agenda. You get 800 bills you have to look at and review and do hearings on, and then actually produce some work out of that. That's got its own life. But on the other side, this always divides itself up into, the job always divides itself up into responsibility to constituents, responsibility to the communities, and then the legislation. And right now, as we roll into the new year, obviously budget is a major topic on the agenda that will be front and center. We have some legislation left over. We're trying to wrap up from last year's conclusion of the session, which is the public records piece and the solar bill, trying to get those 2 pieces done. And obviously, major on everyone's mind. And I think, honestly, probably if you put it on a list, comes out 1, 2 for a lot of people is the opioid crisis, which is running across the nation and hitting the Northeast particularly hard and Massachusetts particularly hard.
Well, when you think of the Judiciary Committee, I wonder, why would you take on, it's a great thing. He who controls the pen has a lot to say. But when I think of, let's see, you're spending time learning and talking a lot with residents of 3 towns.
4.
Well, you got 1 street in Bellingham. Okay.
No. 1 precinct in Medway, which gives me the whole town.
Medway. Yeah.
Never asked anybody where they live when they call.
I always laughed because I said, can't we trade a street or 2 so we get 2 legislators fighting for us? But, when I think of the amount of time, you've got a lot of time to go after that needs to be put into understanding what your residents need in 4 towns. Mm-hmm. Then you've got your normal, work on the Hill. Mm-hmm. I assume you still do a little bit of private practice to pay the bills.
A little bit.
So you sign up for judiciary to do less private?
Well, it's all about, I made the commitment 9 years ago now, or 10 years ago when I decided to run, that this would be my primary responsibility. And that what I did on the side in terms of my law practice would not interfere with it, and it hasn't. It's always the priority. Any time there's been a conflict in timing, the legislative responsibilities take the front, and if there's ever obviously a real conflict of interest, I can't take anything legally, but I have a different standard of my own.
I was going to say, hey, Ernie.
Yeah, no, I have a different standard of my own in terms of things that I think even create a conflict that I could do if I wanted to, but would put me in a position
the risk is
where,
too much.
Well, it would put me in a position where I think, look, here's what I say to people. An attorney should never become an issue in a particular legal matter, and when I sense that my responsibility as a state representative can conflict with something
appear to, even if it doesn't.
That I sense could make people pause, then it's not worth doing the legal work. I'm not serving my client, and I'm certainly not serving myself. So it's the priority, right? And the intersection of my legal experience and career of 33 years with my governmental experience of probably as many years, over about 43 years, comes together really perfectly in the Judiciary Committee.
It just seems like if I just do simple Portuguese math, that's 4 bills a day.
Oh,
800 bills, 200. You have less.
We do. So again, there are about 5,000 bills filed every year between the House and Senate in total in the building.
Oh, wow.
And there are maybe 24 committees that take those. Our committee gets not the majority, the most of any committee typically between 7 and 900, between the majority of those filed in the House by comparison to the Senate, but that's, there's 4 times the number of people. The Revenue Committee probably comes in next to us with several hundred bills, and then they go down, down, down. So in order to accommodate the constitutional obligation to give every one of those bills a hearing, we do 2 hearings a month, and those hearings over the course of 8 months, and those hearings will go from 1 o'clock to, at the very shortest, 6 or 7, and at the very longest, midnight, in order to accommodate what could be anywhere from 20 to 200 bills. But it only takes 1 or 2 bills on the agenda. You want to get rid of mandatory minimums? Be ready for 5 hours of testimony.
I was going to say, there's a day.
You want to do the transgender public accommodation bill? Be ready for 6 hours. You want to do an animal rights bill? Be ready for about 8 or 9 hours of testimony. So managing it, I have a good number of people that work for me, and the staff is terrific in terms of helping to manage it. I have a good co-chair in Will Brownsberger from Belmont in the Senate, and a great complement of people from the Senate and the House on the committee who work hard. So we're able to get through it. But there's so many interesting pieces that come before us in those 800 bills. There are a lot of very significant pieces of legislation that it's just interesting to do. Like I say, the intersection of my legal career and governmental career couldn't come to a better stop inside the State House than chairing the Judiciary Committee.
So now we look at, I guess I hate to call them leftovers because they're pretty significant, but you had stuff left over from last year.
Yeah.
Solar?
Solar's been really left over from last session. We've come to a place when this started back in like 2008 with the solar incentive. It wasn't meant to be like, let's continue to incentivize the solar industry. It was, this is nascent, let's get it going, let's get it on its feet, let it become self-sustaining, and off it goes. And the goal is to get to 1,600 megawatts by 2020, and that's the goal we've set. The industry's pretty strong right now, and the conflict has come to this issue of net metering at retail pricing versus wholesale pricing, because obviously you can't do the Three Stooges thing and lose on every sale but make it up in volume. So if you have to buy from the consumer electricity at the same rate you sell it, there's no margin in there to take care of the infrastructure.
It's a negative margin.
So the margin ends up being picked up more and more by a smaller group of non-solar electrical customers.
So people without any solar have to subsidize.
Right. So it's not in any way, and should not, this sort of tension that's developed from last session into this one over trying to find a solution should in no way be interpreted as a pause in the commitment to alternative energy and solar in particular. It's trying to manage the success, really,
John,
of solar.
I guess what I never understood is, if I am a utility, I'm buying electricity at whatever it is, 15 cents an hour. Why would I buy it from you, Mr. Homeowner, at 25?
Well, you have to. That's the deal.
But why? What's the logic? It seems like you're setting me up to fail.
Well, I understand that, but the logic was this was supposed to be an incentive that got the program started.
So it was supposed to just be a kickoff.
Right. Let's get it started. Let's make this work for the consumer to invest in it, because how do you build an incentive in that makes the consumer want to go out and invest that initial amount of money in getting the solar onto their roof and getting solar into their yard?
Remind me of the kindergarten grant you gave us.
Yeah.
Well, you gave us a 3-year grant to kickstart, get full day going. Then year 4, we all turned around and said,
it's yours now.
What do you mean you're taking it away?
But we told you it was going to be.
Yeah, you said it was a 3-year grant. Which part of 3 years didn't we understand?
But to those early users of solar, the commitment wasn't we would take away your retail net meter. But as we move forward, then there has to be some adjustment in this. And that tension between the two utilities, we've got a very robust solar utility in Massachusetts today, utility industry in Massachusetts, along with a obviously robust traditional utility infrastructure, and they've come head to head in terms of how do we balance it. And I think the House has taken a very cautious look at this and has has from last session into this session said to both sides, look, we want to find a balance, and we're not going to move until we find that balance and that you guys can agree upon this balance. So the bill that's come out that we put out last time did not, we passed the bill, but it didn't get to conference. The solar industry has criticized that bill that we passed as opposed to what the Senate passed, but that's the point here. We're at a certain place, the Senate's at another place, the governor's at another place. We're going to conference this, and we're going to come up with a bill that works.
I heard you say we had a goal. 16.5, that was the goal by 2020.
And we're going to hit that goal, and we're going to hit it sooner than that.
So you turn around and say, we were willing to invest X dollars to get to that goal. I guess the fundamental question I have is, are we on track to hit the goal? And are we spending the amount of money we said? If we are, then you got to go fight for a new program. Because
there's a lot of ratepayer consequence to this bill. Look, again, no one should misunderstand the need to get into the weeds to work out the details with a reticence or a retrenchment to the commitment to solar. Not at all. In fact, you see it everywhere. It's going to continue to grow. It's embedded in our infrastructure at this point. The question is, can we continue to build it and support it in a way that softens the impact it's now starting to have on the rest of the ratepayers and on the infrastructure,
what you're telling me is,
utility?
I need to get solar panels or I'm going to be penalized. The way it's set up that they're buying it retail,
Yeah.
if I'm not taking advantage of solar panels, I'm getting penalized.
Oh, you mean as a, yes.
As a homeowner.
Yeah, as a homeowner, you're seeing a different
And if
an
that's,
impact.
it's kind of, you look
If
at
you
this-
don't get the panels. But of course, that's part of the incentive, right? We want to give people an incentive to look to the alternatives. We don't have a supply of natural fossil fuel in Massachusetts. We're not one of those states. So everything we have comes in from outside. For us, alternatives, extremely important, not just as a smart environmental thing, it's smart economically. And truly, smart environmental starts to take root when it becomes smart
Economical, yeah.
And that has happened
That's
in
when you know you've got
Massachusetts.
the self-sustaining engine.
Then it can take hold. And that's happened in Massachusetts, and it's happened robustly and with a commitment from people within the state, consumer. What we're trying to do, again, is now put this into balance where the demand, being as great as it is, doesn't hurt the homeowner who has not moved to solar,
Right.
and doesn't hurt the utility company that's got to maintain its infrastructure.
But, John, I can understand if the legislature takes a position saying, we want everybody to have, where it's practical, panels. Those who don't, yeah, you're going to pay a premium for not getting on the bandwagon. Then at least I understand it.
Yeah, and the goal here isn't everybody 100% on solar, right? We need a mix of fuel sources.
Wind, solar, everything.
We need a mix of fuel sources, and we're trying to balance that out. So we
you
will
think
come
that'll
to
get done this year?
Well, it'll get done. They're going to go. The Senate's passed its bill. The House has passed its bill. We will conference that. It couldn't get done at the end of 2015. It will get done this year, and my expectation is it'll get done in a way that finds the balance I'm talking about.
So what's the next one left over?
Oh, the public records law. We've had, we're probably the last state in the union to update access to public records. It's been a long time. It needs to be done. The
But Paul
municipalities
Revere did it this way.
Yeah, the municipalities are coming to the reality, kicking and screaming about it, understandably so. But what we're trying to do is, again, take a balanced look at this. There's a reason. The Freedom of Information Act, the Public Records Act, those things are built to make sure there's a transparency and an availability of records that helps people to understand that what's going on in government is proper and right, and that when they need information, they can get access to it. It shouldn't be, it shouldn't be that you request a certain level of documentation and you say, that's fine, we can produce it for you. All we need is $25,000.
$1,000 in
Yeah.
3 months.
Yeah, and so without going into the level of detail that will send the 7 watchers you have away completely, 7 viewers you have, we're trying to bring a balance to that as well. And again, there's a different approach between the Senate and the House on this, but we'll again, conference those and get it together.
But in today's day and age, this is one that just seems like you can throw technology at it.
Well, that's a big piece of it. There's a big piece of it which says, look, we want you, communities and state, to put online, available electronically, as much of the record as you can that somebody might request, so that either one, it's simply available by the click without a request, or two, if it really needs to be dug out, it's a whole lot easier to dig it out. We want you to do it in a timely fashion. If you need more time, we want a process where you can legitimately ask for more time so you're not under the gun of sanctions. But we also need to strengthen the sanctions, because the sanctions today don't balance against, if I have to go to court to try and force you to give me the records, I may spend more going to court without the opportunity to recover attorney's fees than if I had just given up my search.
It's the whole image. There's something just solid that you say, John, I don't understand what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Let me read the records, and then you get back to the 2 reasonable people equally informed seldom disagree,
Mm-hmm.
but it's that equally informed.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because chances are, if I think you're doing something goofy, okay, I know you're not stupid, I know you don't have a bad, attitude, I got to be missing something. And a lot of times I feel it's that you have information that I don't.
Oh, and look, I think, look, I mean, I'm an attorney. I can't function without information. As a public official, I can't function without information. And so if I want to convince people that I'm working with that the decisions I'm making are correct, then access to information and actually trying to get it out to them is important. So, it's another lingering big issue that reflects on the credibility of government in terms of how we treat people with this. So it's sort of a dry issue, but it's really very important to a lot of people, and we're trying to just work that out. In the criminal justice sphere with the Judiciary Committee and generally, the whole issue of mandatory minimum sentencing has been sort of the top issue for the last year. In terms, it's been an issue for a long time, but we came into the 2015-16 session with eliminating mandatory minimum sentencing for drug trafficking as the '1 criminal justice issue that advocates wanted to accomplish.
And that's like a swing, because for the longest time, it was fry 'em.
It was, well, and that's the 1980s.
The 80s,
that's where they all came in.
You walk down the street the wrong way, you go to prison.
So so that was the focus, but my attitude towards that has been throughout the year, guys, you can't take the criminal justice curve. So somebody is not born a criminal, at least as best I know, genetically. You rise up through it, most often gently, and that rise takes you sometimes into prison. And depending upon your behaviors, may keep you there for the rest of your life, but the expectation is, for most people, you're going to curve back out. The complaint about mandatory minimums is that you don't curve back out gently. You get in, you stay, and then you drop off the cliff. Your mandatory's over, now you're out, and that's it. So you go from 9.5 years, 12.5 years, 15 years in prison to here's $40, good luck, you're out. The complaint is, while our percents of incarceration are down, the recidivism, the return rate is high.
Yeah.
It can be in the 30s to 40% rate. And a lot of that has to do with how we're treating people as they run through the system and back out the door. There's a sense from the 80s that screw them. They're bad people, they've done bad things.
You made bad decisions, you pay.
And you will pay the penalty. But way back in law school, you don't remember a lot from your college days, but from criminal law, the very first class I took in criminal law, when we talked about crime and punishment, and we talked about sentencing, the professor I had for that said, look, there's not one reason you create a sentence for a crime committed, and that's the eye for the eye, or punishment. You may be looking at retribution, you may be looking at deterrence, not have somebody else do what this person did, but you also are going to be looking at rehabilitation and certain other components. So when you build a sentence for a crime, when you say, thou shalt not, the question then becomes, when you build the penalty, what are you building that penalty to accomplish? If it's strictly punishment, hey, mandatory minimum sentence. You violated this, you're going to jail for 12 and a half. Done. I don't really care what happens to you
Then
when you come out.
I wouldn't need a judge, would I?
Well,
in
that's
the
what the
sentencing
judges will
part.
say.
No, but I'm saying in the
That's what the
sentencing
judges
part.
say. The judges say, look, mandatory sentencing is bad because you're supposed to look to us as the keeper of that trial to make a decision once we take a look at the person, the crime, the circumstances.
Jury's going to say yay or nay,
And then I have to sentence.
and then you have to take your experience, your discretion,
Right.
and figure out what's fair.
But mandatories came about for the two reasons of, one, they felt the swing, there was a feeling that the swing between judges was too great,
Yep.
that you and I could go in on the exact same set of facts, and a jury could find us
You
guilty
say
for
two, I say
exactly the
10.
same. And I've said that. I had a Superior Court judge testify on mandatory minimums saying, you know, we need discretion, and mandatories are unfair because they treat everybody the same. And I said, okay, I've practiced in just about every Superior Court in this Commonwealth, along with a lot of district courts. Tell me, if I took the exact same set of facts in before 10 different judges, what would be the consistency of the sentence? And she said, well, you'd have 8 of them in a range that would be pretty close, and then 2 outliers. I said, okay, 80% about the same. Chief Judge Gantz has told me that 95% of the people in jail on mandatories would be in jail without mandatories. Maybe I should stay with mandatories because I'm at a higher percent of consistency.
Right.
But the point of it is, if all you're thinking about is punishment, and you don't care what happens on the backside because they're bad people, they broke the law, then mandatories are fine.
Then you go to English system of justice, buy an island, put them on the island.
And it becomes Australia.
Yeah.
But if you're thinking about deterrence, if you're thinking about rehabilitation, then you think a little bit differently, because you then say, well, okay, I got you in here. I've deterred you and I've deterred others. I'm punishing you, but you're going to come back out, unless you're on a life sentence, or as they call it in an HBO special, toe tag parole. The only way you leave is with a toe tag. Very worth watching, by the way. Unless you're on that lifetime sentence without parole, you're coming out. And the reality is that if you come out with no hope, you go back to the same neighborhood you came out of where you committed the crimes, you're going to fall right back in with the same people. You're going to go back and commit the same crimes
let me
again.
play devil's
And you're
advocate.
going to come back into our system.
I do something. I don't care what it is. I get sentenced to 10 years. And you say, boom, I fall off, 10 years one day, here's your $40, have a nice life. See you in a year or so. If that was only 3 years, would I
Okay.
be better off?
No. That's the point. Because mandatories can run anywhere from 1 year, a gun crime, even a a trafficking in coke, all the way up to 20 plus, even 30, I think, for one. So it's not so much the length of it. Yeah, I guess the shorter amount of time, the less the drop off the edges, but the quicker you're back to the same thing you just left.
Unless you
So-
do something with that time.
So the concept of justice reinvestment is to say, look, on average, the numbers say we spend anywhere from $40,000 to $55,000 a year to keep somebody incarcerated. For every person we take out of the system, we're not going to save 40 or 55,000, right? You have infrastructure costs, but have that. If you take a person out of the system and save $25,000, if 40% of those people are circling back in, can you use that $25,000 to create programs that help with work training, education,
Just help so they don't come back a year later.
employment, housing, transportation, and some people who are very sort of black and white law and order issues. Well, wait a minute, why are we rewarding somebody? Well, you're not rewarding them. You're trying to reward society by, as part of your sentencing, saying we will deter, we will punish, and we will rehabilitate, because all of those are in our best interest as a community.
And I think people buy off on the first two, John. You will deter.
Real easy.
When you're sitting in a cell,
Well,
you're not
it's
right.
not so much deterrence. You deter others. In other words,
Right.
if I'm sitting in the cell, have I deterred you? In most cases, the answer to that is no,
No.
because nobody ever thinks they're going to get caught. But, you know.
But I am deterring, I am punishing.
Yeah.
But then you get, what do you mean? Why am I giving them college degrees?
And you're not. But
But even if I did,
some training.
to me it's like,
Why am I giving them a high school GED?
Yeah.
Why am I giving them some
isn't it better to
vocational
have them
training?
come out and have a chance at doing something?
The ultimate goal of the collective, of a community, is to try and make sure that we help each other to a better place by our collective efforts. And if you got folks who don't buy into it, either because they feel hopeless, they're not a part of it, they don't have the education or the work experience, the driver's license, the training in a job to be able to participate in that and benefit from it, they're going to turn to crime because they got no reason not to. They don't feel like they'll get caught, or even if they get caught, hey, I'll go to jail and I'll get
And
free.
some of it, I mean, we've hit it. Sheriff Lou came on, Tom, our police chief, and Amy Leone came on talking about the opiate crisis.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and the first question I asked her is now opiate crisis. That's just bad people in South Central LA. Why are you bringing that up in our little pristine town of Milford? That doesn't affect us, does it?
And you saw that it does.
Well, but that, I mean, I still am amazed at how many people don't believe this is a local issue.
That's becoming less and less as a belief. I think that's being washed away as certain as it used to be that cancer was that family's problem and not our problem. Mental health used to be just that family's problem, not our problem. Alcoholism was that family's problem, not our problem. Yeah, it's too bad Johnny, fell into
But,
that.
it was funny. Amy brought it up. She says, if your neighbor had a daughter or son with cancer, first thing you think of is bring lasagna. Let's try and help them through this. She says, it's still too much of, they find out you're a drug-dependent, they close the door and hide.
It's the 1960s, 1950s, 1960s, 1970s view of what a person who uses heroin is, and people need to understand the transformation that's taken place in terms of the use of opioids, as we became a society more dependent upon prescription drugs for pain relief, we have used more and more powerful and addictive drugs to achieve that relief. And the consequence is that within a matter literally of days, anyone, and we use them a lot for our kids in sports or who have had accidents, and or workers, construction workers and the like, within a matter of days, a person can become addicted to opioids. And when you can no longer secure that source, either because people won't script it or you can't get it on the street, the heroin is just so cheap. I would recommend to people a couple of shows. To the one we were just talking about in terms of the criminal justice issue, and where I was going with that is this: the governor, the speaker, the Senate president, and the chief judge of the Massachusetts Supreme Court, an unusual coalition, politically and non-politically, have agreed to bring the Council on State Governments in, funded by the Pew Center, to do a data dive and analysis of what our incarceration rates are, our recidivism, what the reasons are, how we can perhaps develop programs that will address incarceration and recidivism. We're beginning at January 12th, our first hearing. The governor's chief legal counsel, the chair of the Judiciary Committee from the Senate, the chief judge, trial judge, Paula Carey, and I are co-chairing this 25-person task force, and we're going to address those issues. But on that criminal justice stuff, there's a HBO news mag called Vice, V-I-C-E,
Yes.
if you've seen it. They did a special report on the criminal justice stuff at the federal level, and all the issues I've talked about, they kind of run through, and you take a look at how that system I talked about, the curve versus the edge, is working. and its impact on the federal level. And it's the same thing in every state. So the Council on State Government has done this kind of an analysis in a dozen other states and has been very successful. So we're going to undertake this over the next year, and I'm very optimistic of what will come out of that. But to the opiate piece, HBO also published, and it was on a couple of weeks ago, the governor was talking about it, a program called Heroin Cape Cod USA.
Yes.
I would recommend anybody who has any question about the depth of the problem, watch that show.
Well, the other thing that hit is Cape Cod. This wasn't South Central LA or downtown Detroit. The Cape is ours. It's our home.
Look, they could have done that
Anywhere.
heroin Blackstone Valley, USA.
Right.
They could have done it heroin Merrimack Valley, USA. Heroin Boston, USA.
You know,
Heroin Worcester,
what amazed
USA.
me, John, is you look at Alexis, Michael, active in sports, and you think they could have fallen into this without,
No problem.
you know, when I tore my ACL and my meniscus, ruined my knee, I got a prescription. I got a script for Oxy. It was still sitting in my drawer. I was scared to death to fill it. You know, it's like, you understand that there's no way at whatever it is, $1 a mig. You know, and Tom, Chief O'Loughlin, said, it's 6 hits a day, 80 milligrams a hit. So $80 times 6 is $500 a day. Where is a person going to come up with?
Your house.
Yeah, exactly. That's what he said.
It's why you see in these issues, even though people kind of tend to view them, who are unfamiliar with the problem, they tend to view them in the black and white of law and order versus you're being soft on something. When you find the criminal justice infrastructure, the police, the district attorneys, the sheriffs, the attorney general, all on the same page, which says we need to change this dynamic, then it's, you have to understand that this isn't black and white. If you're law and order, you're on this side. If you're soft and want to give away the house, you're on this side. It's not that at all. And on both of these issues, trying to reduce the incarceration rates and trying to deal with this recidivism and soft landing for people coming out, you'll find the sheriffs as the biggest advocates saying, Lou Evangelitis will say to you, look, I'm a mental health facility. I'm not a house of correction.
Right.
75% of the people in my facility have mental health issues that I'm trying to deal with here by bringing resources to bear. And when I put them on the street, they're not ready for anything. So, you know, and
John,
Tom O'Loughlin will tell you, and Jeff Hopkins up at the hospital in the emergency room will tell you, we need help because we're spending our evenings bringing people back to life.
Right. Well, but
That they don't want to arrest.
No, but the other thing is, if you look at Joey next door, I remember when he was born, he was a little kid, Sally next door. And all of a sudden you say they become heroin addicts. These are not the stereotypical grungy people in a dark alley in a big city. All of a sudden you look and you say, my God, these are our kids.
No, you know, Milford's had a pretty vibrant effort to address this kind of thing through Amy Leone's efforts and Tom O'Loughlin's efforts. And so it's a pretty sophisticated understanding. You know, Milford's been in the forefront of use of Narcan by the police officers and that kind of thing. And Amy's done a great job of providing resources for families to help them. But, you know, Jeff Roy, to his credit, tried to get something started down in Franklin, and it's grown to this incredibly great coalition down there of safe people. And now they've joined together with Milford folks, Amy and the chiefs are now regionally getting together around the idea, and you know the hospital's very engaged with it. And I was talking with Jeff Hopkins today about it because we've got an opioid bill coming up next week to try and make sure I understand what they need. But families are coming to understand this, and the people who come to these meetings and stand up and talk about I need help are not families whose children are dropouts.
Right.
You know,
No,
uneducated.
it's a star quarterback that hurt his back or his knee, or the construction worker.
And it's why I say, watch the show Heroin USA. It wasn't that I learned something because being in the heart of it, but I was still so moved by the personal stories that you recognize, but for the, the twist of fate, this could be my child or your child or anybody's child, and you do not arrest your way out of this. You have to provide resources. Now, the other thing in terms of parents understanding is, having dealt with addiction in my family, this expectation that if the resources are just there, it's going to be solved. The cops and the ER guys will tell you, they'll Narcan somebody and bring them back to life, and the first thing these guys want is to go out and get high again. You can do all you want to try and influence them to want to get resources, but all they want to do is go back out and get high. And until that person is ready, it just doesn't happen.
But still, when you look at Narcan, Tom had mentioned it was $16 to $60 a pen, depending. That seems like an awful cheap way of giving somebody, whether they want it or not, to get another chance.
Well, this unfortunately, there are some folks out there that recognize the Narcan's around, and so they take greater risks.
Oh.
So it's a double-edged sword. But the point is, we can't force somebody to rehabilitate, but when somebody's ready,
But then you got to jump
you
on it right
need
there.
the resources right
Right?
there.
It's not come back next week.
And that's why what Tom O'Loughlin and Amy are trying to do in terms of building a more sophisticated program on a local level, and what is being done in Franklin the same, and now together collaboratively, is trying to make sure those resources are available. And even in the legislation we're talking about in the House, the governor said he wanted to do a 72-hour hold of anybody who shows up with an overdose, involuntary. Now, we got civil rights issues around that, civil liberties issues. And more importantly to that, you do it once, and the person gets out, they're no longer going to come to your hospital
Right.
when they need help again. So I appreciate and have complimented the governor, because his words were, we need to be disruptive to the status quo, and I think that's a perfect tagline
Sure.
for what our efforts have to be about, is being disruptive to the status quo.
So now, talking about disruptive, we have a game that's played in Milford where the FinCom says, we're broke, we have no money. And the departments say, if we don't get money, sun won't shine, moon won't. We're trying to break that.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have a real $300 million problem right now at the state level, or is it more the game of both sides beating their chest trying to get people to listen?
Oh, I don't think there's any game going on. I think, and I don't know that it's a $300 million problem.
Well, let's
the
take a step back.
administration's-
How are we doing?
All the reports that I get is that we're doing well with revenue, but there still remains the fluctuation. There still remains the insecurity that we may not be able to meet the obligations of the budget we estimated and set up, 6, 7, 8 months ago. And so we give the governor the power to say, if you see we are not going to stay in balance, you must act to put us in balance. And that's why from month to month, the governor's looking at those mid-month revenue projections, or realities, at the end of the month looking at those. And there's been talk, and I think what the governor's tried to do responsibly to this point, and I've had a great working relationship with Governor Baker on some of the issues we've talked about, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for him, but one of the things he sells, and I think is he's a good manager. So he looks at this and he says, look, we've got to be cautious. So I think there are discretionary spendings within the budget that he hasn't released yet, earmarks being one of them, which I keep saying to them is local aid, but I recognize what their concern is. But I think what the governor has been trying to do is say, all right, well, let's be cautious in the areas we budgeted but aren't obligated or don't necessarily need to spend right yet, and looking to see where we're going to be. I mean, in a $38-40 billion budget, $300 million isn't the beginning or end of the world, but it's not something you want to have to go in and cut.
But it's halfway through the year.
Mm-hmm.
If 300 million's real, my worry is the longer you wait, the more onerous a task it becomes. Making up $3 million over 12 months is one thing. Making it up over 6, 5, 4.
Yeah, it depends on where it comes from. That's my point. If the earmarks never get released, then it's not a 6 month and 12 months
Right.
issue, right? If certain of the discretionary spending doesn't get
Is
released.
there 300 million in earmark?
No,
I was gonna say,
but I'm
my
just
God, you
saying,
guys went crazy.
you look throughout the, I wish it was. You look throughout the budget, though, for those kinds of
Right.
opportunities, so that you don't have to take the
Cut
burden.
social spending and-
Take the burden out of something that relies upon the same 1/12 every month, right? So that's what I think the governor has been looking at, and I can't say that, I'm in the detailed loop of exactly what he's thinking or where we're at. So, we've been watching it, certainly as every legislator, to see what's the revenue projections, where are we coming in, does it look okay, can we handle it? But I think, from a local perspective, we know that, education will be held harmless, and we hope local aid will be held harmless if any attempt comes, because he's going to have to come to the legislature on both of those,
Sure.
and I don't get a sense
But
of an
even-
appetite.
But John, 300 million sounds like, we debate 80,000 at Milford as a huge number. But 300 million is what, a percent and a half?
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
You sit there and
Not
say.
a percent and a half, less than a percent,
Less than a percent.
yeah.
So if you rated 99%, when you say in July, you passed a set of expectations.
Yeah, it's like any budget. We have people who come in as experts and testify to us in January, February, and March. The governor creates a budget. We act on the budget. The Senate acts on the budget. And of course, it's an estimate based upon those projections
Sure.
of revenue. And when they don't come in when they come in greater, terrific. Some of that ties us directly to our rainy day fund.
Rainy day fund.
When it comes in over. But when we are heavily dependent on things like capital gains, so fluctuations. If the market fluctuates, our gains are going to fluctuate.
Well, the last.
Let's not talk about China. So, those are the things that we have to keep an eye on.
I was going to say 2015 capital, what?
Yeah. The stress of it is, and I knew this, I had one non-recession year in my term so far, right? The first one, 2007. And when it hit in 2008, recessions, 18 months, 2 years, max. When that one became
that's a whole
clear,
term for you, though.
when that became clear that that was not a 2-year recession, that it was going to be 3, 4, 5-year recession, then you build in the recovery from a recession because you lose revenue. It was pretty clear to me that throughout my term of office, that 10 years that we're in now, there wasn't going to be a lot of free cash at the state level to be creative. We were going to be trying to hold ground, and where we lost ground, we were going to try to make up ground when the revenue started to come back. And if there's a pressure on our budget, even though we've got showing revenue increases every month, or decent revenue increases, it's that effort to try and fulfill
The promise.
the promises of getting back to where we were, not necessarily all new programs.
So you think we'll be okay?
I think we're going to be okay.
Well, we don't have a choice. We have to have a balanced
I'm not
budget.
saying the governor won't have to make some 9C cuts, but we've lived through them in the past. And if we've lived through them in the past in the recession, we can live through them again. It's what we have to do. We have no choice. We're obligated to have a balanced budget, and it's the right thing to do.
If we can only do that at the federal level.
We don't deficit spend. Structurally, we have issues. We've relied in making our budgets work the last several years on one-off sales of property, one-off sources of revenue, a little bit of rainy day money. You can only do that for so long. The hope was these would get us to the point where we needed to get to make it work. And I think we
So as we look through what's coming up, the election, comments on blue or red and not laughter?
No, I think the most surprising thing to me about both the Republican and Democratic primaries is that both parties have had 8 years to
Get ready?
get ready for the end of a presidency. I mean, I'm not saying Obama couldn't have been beaten at the end of his first term, and Romney put on a valid and valiant effort to try and defeat him, but the incumbency at the federal level is very strong. So assuming that, you know, it's going to take 8 years to change presidencies, and it will be a change at that point, right? Absolutely. I would have thought both parties would have been better prepared to present candidates, and I'm saying that from sort of a clinical political scientist standpoint, that when I look at historically, I would have expected that either in Congress, the Senate, or in the governor's offices, people would have emerged that would have been clear leaders ready to take on the challenge, as opposed to, and I'm not criticizing Hillary Clinton, and I'm not criticizing Donald Trump, and I'm not criticizing some of the other people. I'm just surprised there's not a stronger base of a few candidates of newness
John,
ready to take on the challenge. I
don't get it. I mean, originally when Donald Trump started, I thought it was like you're reading the California primaries to send a message of dissatisfaction. In a primary, they vote for Mickey Mouse. Okay. But when it comes down to the election, they get serious and pick who they think will represent them best. In November, I joked around and said, my biggest nightmare is I'm going to go into the ballot box and have a choice between somebody who I believe lies to me constantly and a buffoon.
I won't ask you which one's which.
I just,
well,
I don't
here's the
get
thing.
it.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, Donald Trump has been running what historically would be a third-party candidate campaign.
Yes.
Okay, he's the Ross Perot, he's George Wallace, he's those kinds
Nader.
of people. He's those kinds of people who traditionally are running outside the two parties. And historically, people in that situation have run pretty well in the polls against the two parties.
Yes.
Until around June or July even.
Oh, wow.
As
Okay.
far in as April, May, June.
So there is hope.
Well, here's the difference. At that point, both of the parties have typically nominated a traditional candidate.
Okay.
And the middle starts to break back to the traditional candidates around the summertime, as they realize we're really not going to elect a third-party candidate. Now, that doesn't mean the third-party candidate goes away, and that third-party candidate can often dictate and very well will who of the two wins, depending upon whether it's the Democratic-leaning independent or the Republican-leaning independent taking the votes away. The problem right now is what I was talking about. There's no center of traditional gravity within the Republican Party that has put its candidate forward who's going to get the nomination, with Trump being a third-party candidate, and then people will break back. So the reality is Trump could end up as a third-party candidate within the Republican structure, and that's going to be interesting to watch to see whether, once you get beyond the base of the Republican Party, the vast middle, which tends not to lean to that third-party candidate, will stay with a Donald Trump at that point. But it's this sort of fascination that I have with the fact that there's no center of gravity inside the Republican Party putting up that traditional candidate that's left us where we are right now.
But you know,
and by the way, no bullpen ready in the Democratic Party to challenge a Hillary Clinton who, you know, was the second candidate of the Democratic Party 8 years ago. And still, 8 years later, there's no one ready as a bullpen to take her on, other than Bernie Sanders, who's really running a, George McGovern campaign.
But I'll ask you the same question I've asked other people. I hear blah, 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 socialist, blah, blah. What does
Bernie?
it mean? Yeah.
I don't think
I mean,
he's a socialist.
Democrat, he says he's a democratic socialist. It's like, okay, didn't we just spend the better part of my life fighting socialism, proving that our system works better?
You know, Bernie believes in certain things. He's a very value-driven guy, always has been, and I respect that. I look more for the leadership qualities, and if I even agreed with Bernie Sanders on every one of his political viewpoints, which I don't, but if I did, I would be reticent to vote for him because he's never demonstrated to me
No,
management leadership
to
qualities.
me, he's somebody who speaks dogma. You're
Well,
not
but
gonna
it's
get-
more, if I look at him, can he translate his policies into action?
Right.
Can he manage? Is he ready to manage the United States?
Can he get people to follow him?
Yeah. Can he manage the United States government? Can he manage the United States infrastructure? And I'm not convinced that he would be ready to do that, because that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for, does the person have the ability to manage? I want somebody certainly that is reflective of my, primarily of my value system, but I want somebody who can run the country
But
too.
it's the same thing. I don't know what Donald Trump stands for. You know, I mean, I would feel bad for the man for the first time ever. One-on-one debate with Hillary. In my mind, she'll slice him and dice him, because when he sits there and say, "I'll make it better."
You know, what I know enough about politics to do is not predict
Yeah.
the outcomes. And if he should secure the nomination, it'll be a very interesting fall.
It'll be entertaining.
Except we really don't want to just be entertained.
Well, there's a problem.
We want to
It'll
pick
be
somebody.
entertaining.
We
and
want to pick somebody who can lead. But the truth is, to somewhat contradict what I said about Sanders, I'm not sure it makes a real big difference, because Congress is still stuck. And as long as Congress is stuck, and it's been now way too many years that it's stuck, unable to act. I mean, they're showing a little bit of sign of willingness to act, but it's going to be hard for any president to be successful.
The problem I have is everybody's saying the Republicans are personal. There's a personal vendetta against Obama. I'm not sure we're that lucky, because if that was the point in 12 months, it would go away.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, as you say, that the next person in. And I mean, you got Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz just creeps me out. I don't know why, but he just creeps me out. Just same way. I can't see him leading. You know, but if you had Hillary or Bernie or somebody step in, I don't know that it's not more the same.
Well, it in part is because there's this dynamic where neither party is really that much in control of either House, the Senate or the House, at the congressional level. But within the Republican Party, there is enough of a disagreement, I mean, really sincere disagreement politically, that forming majorities to work together with
Even as
themselves
Republicans.
to then try and
Sure.
get together with Democrats, until that gets resolved, it's not going to work. I mean, I could compare it to Massachusetts to say, yeah, okay, there's 125 Democrats and 35 Republicans in the House. The consequence of which is there's a vast differential in political opinion within the Democratic Party. But it's not so ugly that we can't function. And the truth is, the majority moderate is large enough that neither wing can absolutely dominate. And we treat the Republican minority with a whole lot more respect than a larger minority in Congress gets treated. So, for instance, last night we were working out a particular piece of legislation to remove a license suspension for drug offenses. The Republicans had an amendment. We could have run that amendment right off the floor with a 125-35 majority. We spent 3.5 hours, the chairman of transportation and the chairman and myself, working with the Republican leadership and the particular representatives to come to a compromise on their amendment, because we wanted unanimity on our vote, and we got unanimity on our vote. We got a unanimous vote on this that could have gone down party lines. Okay, you're 125-35. What difference does it make you on party lines? This was an important enough issue that we wanted the public to see we were unanimous on this thing.
But see,
And there was legitimacy to the concern raised within
that's
the amendment.
Thing that makes me proud of our Beacon Hill people. I've always said it. I have a hard time telling the difference between a liberal Republican and a conservative Democrat. They kind of, you know, there's not, I mean, there's always going to be a thin, but it's a thin line of dark blue and a thin line of dark red. Mm-hmm. Most of the people up there I see is more purple. It's kind of in the middle, a mixture. Whereas when I get out to the square states, boy, that's so dark red. If you don't answer the 2 litmus questions correctly, you know, I mean, I laugh because we do the conservative view, and they call me a liberal. And I know it would make your skin crawl. But the liberals call me a conservative. And I'm sitting there saying, okay, I'm one of those people in the middle that nobody will claim.
I keep getting invited into the Republican Party. I tell them when they can give me the bigger office, I'll come over, but that's, but it is, there's a balance inside of our system, and it tends to work. So we'll see what happens on the national level. I'm not sure that you or I are going to solve that problem here tonight.
Well, no, it was funny because you're halfway there, because I remember when I went in to the primary, I said, I'll take a blue ballot. And they said, you want Republican? Yeah, no, I said, I'll take a blue one because I want to vote for John. And they said, well, you can't vote for John on a blue ballot. And I was like, excuse me? I had no idea that Massachusetts, for some reason, flips the colors.
Well, the blue and the red are really made up by other people. They're not reflective of what government thinks.
But it was just so funny because after watching TV, I just assumed.
You assumed red and blue are what
Red and blue
everybody's
are what
agreed upon.
NBC and ABC and CBS puts it on.
Yeah, that's what they've agreed upon.
And then in Milford, I show up and they say, well, John's not on the blue ballot. I said, oh my God, does his mother? Oh. She's probably sending thunderbolts down at him.
My mother would be fine.
So, we're getting close. 6 months to go. What do you see as the big challenges coming up?
For us at the state level, just the same things we've talked about. I mean, there's something new every day, but I'm hoping we get through the budget we get through this budget safely.
Prepare the next one.
That in preparation for the next one, we can continue to make some incremental improvements. We're going to have a lot of ballot questions. I just had referred to the committee the question on whether to legalize marijuana in Massachusetts. We'll be doing a hearing on that as to whether we release it and send it to the ballot or whether they have to go get another 10,000 signatures to get it on. The charter school issue. A lot more things are being moved to ballot questions as people get a little frustrated. So we'll see where those go.
We'll see in 3 months when we get closer.
That's right.
And as always, to our 6 loyal viewers, if we haven't chased away one of them, thank you for joining. The key, as I've always said, I'll never ask you to vote one way or another, but I'll beg you to become informed and go and vote. So become aware of the issues and look, come election day, at who you believe best represents yourself and your views. So thank you for everything you do.
Thank you.
Good night, and may God bless.